Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're on. It's great to see so many folk here today to celebrate the life of Peter Lester. It speaks volumes for the respect and affection in which he was held, not just here in New Zealand, but around the world. And it's fitting that this is being live streamed on the internet so his many friends across the globe can all be part of it. My name is Marty Tasker, described in one of an avalanche of tributes to Peter as his work husband, and I'll be your MC this afternoon. First up, we all extend our heartfelt condolences to Susie and the Lester family, and we're delighted to have Paul and Sean here representing them today. Our thanks due to the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron for this fine venue, and it's my pleasure to introduce the Squadron Commodore, David Blakey.
Thank you, Martin. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Blakey. I'm the Commodore of the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron. And on behalf of the Squadron, it is my honour to welcome you all here today as we celebrate the life of Peter Lester. May I extend a very special welcome to those members of Peter's family who are here today. Peter's story began in Christchurch, and he grew up in Littleton, where he first discovered his passion for sailing in a P-class dinghy. Like so many of our finest sailors, that set him on a remarkable journey. He later moved to Auckland to further his sailing career, and the rest, as we all know, is history. You will shortly hear from others who will speak in more detail about Peter's many successes, from his racing in OK dinghies and fins to IOR Ton Cup campaigns, the Admiral's Cup and the America's Cup. He went on to apply his immense knowledge and coaching to help develop sailors at both national and Olympic level. In more recent years, of course, Peter became a household name. His voice and presence as a broadcaster brought our sport to millions around the world. Whether covering the Olympics or the America's Cup, his commentary was always informed, insightful, and delivered with an easy, relaxed style that made his sailing accessible to everyone. The outpouring of love and affection following his sudden passing just a couple of weeks ago has shown us the extraordinary impact he made, not only on the sailing community, but the wider public. Peter made a tremendous contribution to our sport, both on and off the water. He was a sailor, a coach, a commentator, and above all, a generous and respected member of our sailing family. We are privileged to host this gathering here today in his honour and to celebrate together a life so well lived. Welcome, and thank you for joining us to pay a special tribute to Peter Lester.
So this afternoon we're going to tell Pete's extraordinary story through videos and interviews, and we're going to start with his first world title. From modest beginnings in Littleton, as already mentioned, Pete's talent soon became obvious, and he moved through all those classes to become a world champion for the first time at just 22.
The 1977 World Championships were on Auckland's Hauraki Gulf to find a world champion in these 15th World Championships. New Zealand's Peter Lester led with the perfect score of 0 points.
Some of our guys from New Zealand here could do very well in the light. Richard Dobson's and Tom Dobson have both showed really good speed in the light.
Peter Lester, fourth in the last heat, who had the series won. Significantly, Beverly Roberts hands Peter Lester the victory fizz. Significantly, Lester swaps the glass for the bottle. For Peter Lester, the great moment, because he, along with the great Clyde Roberts, is only the second New Zealander to win a monotype world title.
Now you'll all have recognised the voice of that commentary, and here is the voice of yachting, PJ, Peter Montgomery.
Hello. We've got to keep it tight. What a sight, what a wonderful turnout to salute Peter Lester. So many familiar faces from over the last half century. When I arrived today, one of those faces reassured me, "Hey, I remember you. You used to be Peter Montgomery." I first heard of Peter in the early mid-1970s as a rising talent from Christchurch, and when he started to make waves in junior sailing. Peter was told he should move to Auckland for regular top competition. He did, and it soon paid off. The photo up here is Peter being interviewed by me just after he had won the World OK Dinghy Championships, Takapuna, 1977. That was his first interview of a world title. And very quickly, so many opportunities opened to the Finn class, keel boats, the one-ton cup with Graham Woodruff. Peter learned a lot from Woody. Cameron Lewis, another American, John Bertrand, changed Finn sailing forever in the World Finn Gold Cup 1980, also out off Takapuna. This is an edited version of an email from Cam Lewis last week. 1978, Helsinki, Finland, Finn Regatta, the pre-Olympic regatta at Tallinn. That in those days it was Soviet Estonia. Peter Lester went out and won every race by a country mile in a big breeze, and I'm talking blow the dogs off their chains windy. Peter's life was full of accomplishments. Last April, Cameron Lewis rang Peter and said that his boy Bo was visiting Auckland. Peter immediately offered to take Bo to the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron for a visit and to look at the America's Cup. Peter asked Cam, "Has Bo ever seen the America's Cup?" No, he hasn't. Peter and Cam raced in the America's Cup 1988 against each other. Cameron, this is a quote from his email, "I was the grinder back in the day when humans turned a winch handle in the America's Cup." After winning the World Finn Gold Cup 1980 for my second time, my being Cameron Lewis, in a row, thanks to Peter Lester, fellow competitor, and Graham Deegan, my sailmaker, I was thrown out of the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron and banned for life for the best food fight ever. I went back in through the kitchen window and got right back into the party. Next day's Sunday sports page was hilarious. Boston Tea Party. Cameron Lewis of Boston, Massachusetts, single-handedly destroyed the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron's prize-giving dinner. Mia's wife hit with a custard pie. And so it goes on. Jimmy Carter had taken our collective dreams away from competing for the Olympic medals in Tallinn, and this was my final Finn effort to any worthy note. And you could also add probably Robert Muldoon for New Zealanders. First mate to congratulate me on Sunday morning after the regatta and celebrations was Peter Lester. He helped in the fun too. I've edited that a bit, too much information for family, so we'll just keep it down a little bit. But sail on, Peter. Cameron Lewis. Now back to me. Peter was part of a generation where a lot happened quickly, with opportunities from dinghy sailing to keel boats, one-ton cup, Admiral's Cup, America's Cup, more on that coming up from others. But as I reflect on the last 50 years, Peter is the only one to leave his mark in the trilogy of elite sailing, winning world championships, leading the NZL high-performance coaching team through Olympic cycles, and as a broadcaster, notably America's Cups and Olympics with his on-water analysis. Peter had a special gift with his warm, engaging smile to make you feel you were the only person he had seen all day. Peter taught us many lessons on living fulfilling lives, but like most people out of that mould, there are many layers beyond that in a life well lived. Peter Lester, world champion sailor, coach, high-performance sailing, broadcaster who connected with his audience, and a very proud family man. A bright, shining light has gone out in sailing.
Thanks, PJ. Inimitable. So, part of that era, and a competitor at one time, and then, well, arguably the most amazing race officer for the America's Cup was Harold Bennett, a big part of Peter's early life. and he's here to tell us a few stories.
Good afternoon, everyone, and it is such a sad time to have to be talking about someone and ribbing them when they're not here. I first met Peter, would be over 50 years ago, and we were racing our OK dinghies at that point. Very competitive class, lots of boats, and we were going to a competition, a nationals in Littleton, and we were told that there was a young guy down there that was going to join the group and sail in the nationals, not long out of P class, and he's not a bad sailor coming from Canterbury, right? And so we duly go down, and I've got a vision of meeting this guy, this young guy. So he's going to be probably 6 foot tall, youngster, skinny. He's going to be one of those guys that's got it all in his mind, and he's going to try and give us a wind up. And so I get there and I go looking for him, and I find him. And I say, "You're Peter Lester?" "Yeah." Here's this young guy, knee-high to a grasshopper. He had this amazing head of hair, which was curly and blonde, and with that infectious smile. And he goes, "Yeah, I'm going to give it a go, but there's going to be a bit of wind, I think, and I might have a bit on." And I thought to myself, looking at him, I thought, "You're going to have a bit on, all right." And so that, I'll give him his due. He sailed hard, he finished his races, and he was happy that he was in the bunch somewhere and completed the competition. And that began a relationship that was very interesting for our family, and that during the time, as he was leading up to that event, he was making his plans then about where he was going forward with, how he was going to go forward. And those plans were get to Auckland. And we said to him, "Fine, you get up there and come sail with us, and we train. We race Saturdays at Takapuna, Sundays at Murray's Bay, summer and winter, no problem, and even during the week if you're around." And so he came up and he stayed with a guy called Glenn Ballroom, another competitive sailor. And those boys, they would turn up at Takapuna with the boats, race, and then in the afternoon, put them on the trailer, they'd drive up to Murray's Bay, stay at our place, and then we'd sail on Sunday, then they'd have a barbecue, we'd have a barbecue on the night. And Peter, in his way, he made friends with everyone at that time. He was a very friendly character. And he wasn't the guy that I thought we might see, who's someone you'd hear before you saw him. But he was a quiet and assuming, but he came and he lived with us on weekends in particular. Our family grew attached to him. In fact, I think they thought he was their brother. And I do remember an interesting period leading up to a Christmas where we were chatting about what's going to happen over Christmas, and he said, "Oh, I'm going down to see Mum and Dad. Glenn and I are going down, and we'll take Carla with us." And this is where Robin and I had one of those, "what the hell are we thinking" moments. "Yeah, she can come. She's 4 years old." And, well, okay, fine. And those days, kids under 3, I think, were able to fly free as long as they sat on someone's knee. Well, Pete said, "That's not a problem." And they got to the airport, passed her through as 3. She sat on his knee all the way down and on Glenn's all the way back. But she had one of the most wonderful Christmases with Pete down there at 4 years old, and she's never forgotten it. And unfortunately, she's not here today to be able to be with us. But that's the sort of guy that he was. I thought he was very instrumental in making friends, enjoying himself. He also, over the next few years, in a lot of the years, when we ended up working on various events together, such as America's Cup and used to go up, him and I would go to Korea, and I know Younger's in the audience today who ran that Korea Cup. And we would go up there and have a lot of fun running the racing. And he'd be chatting away he'd do his commentary stuff. And every now and again I'd get the phone call, any gossip, yeah, a little bit. And of course that moved on when we were through in America's Cup as well. And in San Francisco in particular, I was forever getting the phone would ring, oh, Peter Lester. And any gossip, what's happening? Have you heard anything? And so we had a great banter over that period of time. And I've always had a good friendship with Pete, and I'm so sad to see him gone. But Pete, you'll be with us in mind forever. I'll never forget. We had some wonderful memories. Thank you.
Thanks, H. I benefited from a lot of those little conversations that you had, extra little bits of information. It was classic. So, over the next decade, Peter forged a career as one of New Zealand's first professional sailors, as we've alluded to, the One-Ton Cup, the Kenwood Cup, and the Admiral's Cup. And then 10 years after he won his first title, he was on top of the sailing world again.
On our boat, the guys are operating very, very smoothly at the moment. Even when we have slight mistakes, the morale of the group of people is very high.
And leading the cavalry charge of one-tonners and some of the big boats, Bevan Woolley, Pete Lester and Brad Butterworth.
We had to all go on deck and do 12 hours at a stint, with no one below, and that's pretty tough on the crew. And I think it's reflected in the way the guys feel tonight. Okay, we won the thing, but everyone's a bit blown away, really.
Hello everyone. Obviously a sad day where we've lost one of the great sailors in New Zealand. I can remember growing up as a young boy in Dunedin, where I was just starting out as a sailor, and Peter Lester became an icon in New Zealand sailing when he won the OK Dinghy Worlds. Peter Montgomery commentating on that championship, and it was inspirational, I think, for any young sailor growing up, and he was certainly somebody that we were all at that stage as young P-class sailors aspiring to be like. And then later on in my career, I think it was 1992 or 1993, I had the chance to compete with Pete in the One-Ton Cup in Sardinia, where he was the helmsman and I was the tactician for a German boat, Pinter, and we won it. So that was it was a great event to be part of with Pete, and I'll always remember the celebration afterwards. It was a hell of a lot of fun. But yeah, Pete was a good guy to hang out with, to have a beer with. And he was obviously a very, very influential sailor in his time. So, sad day for all, but a lot of fond memories from my time spent with Pete.
So, going back to the Admiral's Cup, rather, key member of that winning team was the legendary Tom Schnackenberg, who's with us today to share some memories.
I can get up and talk for hours, but I thought I'll keep it tight, so I'm going to read what I wrote. Peter and I actually worked together on and off for about 5 years, and it started with in '87, I was lucky enough to be invited as navigator on Kiwi. And that was a busy year, as you may remember. Dennis had retrieved the America's Cup in Fremantle, and then he and San Diego Yacht Club were essentially silent about the next event. Alan Bond sold Australia 3 and 4 to Mr. Kobayashi, Mitsubishi Kobayashi from Japan. That was Bengal Bay. And that started a long relationship with the Australians. And as you know, in those days, I was half Kiwi, half Aussie in a way. And Kobayashi even helped to fund the Endeavour replica in Perth. And so we Australians joined with the Japanese owners and went racing the 12-metre regatta in Sardinia and eventually beat KZ7 narrowly in the close final. Then I flew with Michael and Andrew to Annapolis, and we had a chat with Bruce Farr, and we decided that on this challenge, a deed of gift challenge. And Bruce drew up the dimensions, and Michael and Andrew went off to San Diego Yacht Club and put the challenge down and said, we'll see you in 10 months. So then, of course, I go back to Cowes for the Admiral's Cup. And Michael came to Cowes and announced the challenge. So this was the background then. And we had a magic event. And Peter, of course, skippered Propaganda to be the top boat. And it was part of us actually winning. Propaganda beat Jamarella, which was a sister ship. The crew had plenty of, self-awareness and experienced local knowledge and confidence, but yet Propaganda beat them out. And the New Zealand team did have a magic feel about it, and Peter was part of that. We weren't under any special pressure. We weren't expected to win. In fact, the English were probably the favourites. And on Kiwi, our job was just to beat Indulgence and the other boats in our mid-size. And it was quite a democratic team, no top-down commands from the team leaders. The owners were with us, but they were just having fun. In the end, we won the Admiral's Cup, and that win, combined with a closed 12-metre campaign and the surprise deed of gift challenge, convinced the Connor Group that there was no way they were going to defend the America's Cup successfully against New Zealand, unless they did something radical, like building a catamaran. And so, getting back to Peter's life, the next adventure was the 88 challenge in San Diego. And that's me.
We're going to get to 88 shortly, but before then, it was at the Admiral's Cup that Peter had inadvertently displayed the skills that would lead later to a second career. TVNZ sports reporter Jane Dent, en route to becoming their first America's Cup correspondent, recalls Pete's innate ability to explain sailing's nuances.
Kia ora, everybody. I first met Pete Lester back in 1987 at the Admiral's Cup in Cowes. And along with all the other journalists there, we pretty quickly worked out that Pete was the go-to guy for media. He could distill complex yachting technicalities into simple language, and that was gold for media. So it wasn't rocket science to work out that one day Pete might make a great yachting commentator, as of course he did. But my special memory of Pete will be in San Diego in 1991. Prior to the America's Cup, I was living on my own there, and the kindness that Susie and Pete showed me at that time was really genuine. They would invite me over for dinner and make me feel like part of the family, and that's a memory I will always treasure. So, R.I.P. Pete, love to you and Susie, and sorry we can't be there today.
So PJ, you've had quite a lot to do with Jane Dent when looking after her as well in back in San Diego, really.
Yes, well, there was. We can't give too much information away on some of these things, but Jane and I first went to Fremantle and we were woefully understaffed, and there was so much interest, and the escalation of interest, and we want more and more. But if you haven't got any socks, you can't pull them up. And it was very difficult to do that, but we got through it in the end. And then later that year, they had the World 12 Meters in Sardinia, again with KZ7, and they won it there. And that's where Jane met her husband, Peter, and they took off then to the Admiral's Cup. And one thing led to another, and Jane suggested Peter Lester really looked after Jane, particularly for reporting and all the requirements as well during the Admiral's Cup. And from there, she just covered so many events for right through the 95 America's Cup and many in between. And Peter was very much a trusted confidant to Jane through all of that.
That's great. Actually, there are some more slightly stranger key players in that victorious Admiral's Cup campaign, where Jane had met up with Peter. There were the so-called camp mothers, Jenny Cooper and Kate Livingston, who fed and watered the propaganda crew and put up with their banter, most notably from one P. Lester, as Kate recalls.
Once we had it set up, the sailors started arriving, and they came from everywhere, and boy, were there some big personalities in that group, and cheeky Peter Lester was one of them. And those really were all the ingredients we needed to have the best fun, the most exciting times that we'd ever had. And all the boys seemed to have nicknames that were body parts back then. So I'm thinking that Jenny and I were actually quite lucky that Pete arrived on the scene early, and he gave us our handle for the whole series, which was the Babbling Brooks, which is Cockney rhyming slang for the cooks, or the Babblers for short. Thinking back on it, Pete and Ross Fields must have arrived quite early in the piece at Fawlty Towers, and they managed to score one of the best bedrooms inside the house every morning, 6 o'clock on the dot. There was a thump, thump, thump on Jenny and my bedroom roof because Ross and Pete were directly above us, followed by Pete's dulcet tones yelling, "Cup of tea, babblers!" Cheeky monkey. He was the only one that would have got away with that. There were many other stories that came to mind in our reminiscing, but I'll leave it there. We all send our love and condolences to Pete's family. He really was one of life's great characters.
Thanks, Kate. So to 1988 and the big boat. And this was really Pete's first foray into the America's Cup on KZ1, the Monster, and that mismatch with Dennis Conner and his catamaran. This was, of course, the time of Miami Vice and Duran, when they were at their peak, and outrageous follies like this ridiculous boat were not unusual. And you're spotting here the very cool dude in the white outfit and the sunglasses and the walkie-talkie.
Regardless of the possibility of further court action after the race, or the stacked odds of such a mismatch, the 64-strong Kiwi team have now switched to what Michael Fay calls a winning mode.
I rate the cat very favourably. I mean, as Michael keeps telling us all, it is a mismatch. We knew that the contest could end up like this for the sailors. I mean, it's going to go on after we've finished here.
Even if they couldn't beat the cat, they'd sailed around the course faster than any other monohull could have.
Hi everyone, I feel very honoured to be able to say a few words about our good friend Peter Lester. Obviously, Pete was a bit of a hero of mine when I was a kid, when he got carried up the beach in Tefapuna after winning 70% I'm okay dinghy with South Pacific Tally was an okay bringing line. I sailed with Pete back in '88 on the 90k boat KZ1 against 30 Dennis in the catamaran. And that boat was quite an interesting boat because it was pretty high tech for its time. We had high tech, but really the designers were shooting from the hip as far as what was going on. First day we left the dock in Devonport in shroud of darkness because everything was secret. And the designers told us to all stand in the middle of the boat, which was 35 meters, because it had been stood on the wing of the heel over too much. So we did a little test, and half the crew stood on the wing and it heeled over 3 degrees. And the rest of the crew stood on the wing that moved over 5 or 6. So that was the first sort of calculation that we went at Australia. But when we were in San Diego, we added sail area to the boat, so we made the bowsprit longer, and Russell Boulder had told us that it was the bowsprit's a simple bit of engineering, the side is a rock. And then we proceeded to snap that, a couple of days later, and I think we ended up going through 3 of them. But there was also the time we thought the keel was starting to made some funny noises, sort of pinging away, like it was cracking, and we were all a bit concerned. And then the next thing, a nuclear submarine popped up against orders, and we figured out they'd be using a sonar on the keel. But Pete, I did a lot of sailing with Pete in the 80s and 90s. We won the One Ton Cup together and Harewood Cup, and we had a lot of fun together sailing and racing with each other at all different places around the world. And here we've got the Super Series fleet behind us. There's many Kiwis and overseas sailors here that all sail with Pete or against him somewhere along the line, and we've certainly all heard his voice with the America's Cup commentary. So it's a sad day for all of us. Susie, they all pass their condolences, and Jane and my Susie, to you and Paul and Ryan and Sean and their families. We really, it's a sad day, and we pass our condolences to you all.
Staying with the America's Cup, Peter coached the Spanish Challenge at the 1992 Louis Vuitton Cup in San Diego and basically moulded a group of young sailors into a really credible team.
Peter Lester was my first coach in America's Cup back in 1992. We didn't know anything about America's Cup. We didn't know anything about man's racing. We thought that sailing was just an art, and we didn't prepare much. We didn't train. We had no idea of tactics. And he was the one that taught us all. It was incredible that how he was able to blend a group of Spaniards that were all good sailors but had no preparation whatsoever, and made an America's Cup team for the first time. He was so funny. He started all his briefings, so debriefs, with the word basically. That's how he started all his explanations. And many of the crew, many of the sailors and many of the team, that was the only word that they understood, basically. He was the one that told me that I should specialize in the racing rods, and I should stick with America's Cup. And after the America's Cup, I can really say that he changed my life. Thank you, Peter.
So when the Spanish exited, Peter embarked on what would become this second stellar career as a commentator. TVNZ needed someone who was current in the America's Cup and who could effectively translate yachting speak, as we've said before, into something that the layman could embrace, and they found it in Peter. And there's a lot of the TVNZ crew from that time who are here today, which is very cool. And their boss then was Dennis Harvey.
Very quickly became apparent that Pete had an innate ability to interpret the complex technical details of sailing into a language that everyday non-sailors could understand and make a complex sport readily understandable. He switched from sailor to the TV world like a duck to water, and we soon realised we had a real talent with us, beginning what would be a long career as one of the foremost global sailing commentators across both the Cup and the Olympics. Pete's easygoing manner, nothing was stressful, his no-nonsense approach, and his wry sense of humour connected him to a worldwide audience beyond just New Zealand. I learned so much from Pete, and the TV world has been privileged to have had his insights to make sailing a readily understandable sport.
So between America's Cups, Peter also worked, as PJ alluded to before, as a high-performance coach with Yachting New Zealand, mentoring Kiwi Olympians. It's another way in which he was able to share his knowledge and experience and love of the sport, but this time with young sailors, really. Now here's the former CEO of Yachting New Zealand, David Abercrombie.
All these tall people. I think if I look around the room, I think we all recognise what an honour and a privilege it's been for all of us to have known Pete Lester. His sense of humour and his willingness to help people. Pete came into Yachting New Zealand in 1986 as the first real Olympic coach and high performance director. I'd like to think we've come a long way since those days, but 96 Atlanta, Barbara Kendall, I think silver. 2000 Sydney, Barbara Kendall and Aaron McIntosh bronze. And then again 2004 in Athens. And Pete's legacy in terms of his analysis, his expertise, his patience, and the time that he gave to people, young people in particular will live on. And I'm just going to recount a couple of stories that perhaps aren't that well known, but just following the 2000 America's Cup, when Pete was still in the Yachting New Zealand office, and when you look at everything that Pete has done, you wonder how he found time to be an Olympic coach and set up Yachting New Zealand's high performance program. But he was in the office one day, and a young girl walked into the office and asked if there was someone that could talk to her about how to get into sailing. And Pete was there, and he invited her to come in, and he sat down and in his usual patient way listened to this young lady tell him what she wanted to do. And he said, well, what is it you want to do? And she looked at a model of the Team New Zealand America's Cup boat on the wall, and she said, I want to sail that. And Pete said, well, that's great ambition. How old are you? And she said, 14. And so he talked to this young girl, and he told her how she should get into yachting. Joe LA now with Polly Powery, gold in London, silver in Rio, and a legend in women's sailing, especially in this country. And then there's another little story. When all these young people come into sailing, and Yachting New Zealand had no money, and I might say they still don't, much as many of you think they do. There was a group of gentlemen, and Gary's here today in Warwick, who from the St John's Rotary, who Pete had quite a lot to do with, and he was and the St John's team were keen on raising some money to go to Ontario to send some young people to give them the opportunity to sail. And Pete, along with the St John's team, got together and raised a significant amount of money. And I'm talking in those days, in the 90s, tens of thousands of dollars. That scholarship still remains, and it still helps young people get to international regattas. And I was at St John's at the end of last year with Pete, and I think Gary will tell you there are very few people that can fill a Rotary Club dinner, as I'm sure many of you have been to. So Pete, your legacy will live on. It'll live on in your family, and it'll live on the impact that you've made to the sport. So we all send our condolences and thank you very much.
Thanks, Abu. Peter wasn't yet done with America's Cup sailing, returning to the fray as tactician to Chris Dixon on Tag Heuer in 1995. But beforehand, Peter, as I said, was coach of the Sydney Olympics, and it's that experience which Chris is going to relive now.
Well, it's a family story, not a sailing one, really. It was the late 1990s. Jeremy Stevenson and I were racing Tornado catamarans, and we were in Sydney doing the World Championships with our Tornado, with our coach, Pete, our coach boat, and Pete's son, Sean, in Sydney. This particular day, the racing was not inside Sydney Harbour, but out off a couple of miles off Manly. So we towed out in the morning, raced all day, and the last race finished. It was kind of late. It was well after 6 o'clock from memory. And Jerry and I crossed the finish line and carried on sailing downwind towards Sydney Heads and in a shrinking sea breeze. And it wouldn't be long, of course, before Pete and Sean rocked up in the chase boat with some water and some food and warm jacket and a tow home. Well, after about half an hour, there was no Pete, no chase boat, and no one else left in the ocean except us. We figured out, well, must have been some major emergency, and we're on our own out here. So we sailed home and then drifted home, and then ended up paddling in the dark through Sydney Heads from the middle of the Tasman Sea, back up into Middle Harbour. And by the time we put our boat to bed in the dinghy park, it was way after 10 o'clock, and we were, needless to say, hungry, thirsty, cold, tired, and grumpy. As you can all imagine, to me it was, I was quite relaxed about it, but Jerry was quite ropeable. Well, Next morning, the story comes out that there was no big emergency, but the reason that Pete had abandoned us mid-Tasman was because he'd promised son Sean that he'd take him to the movies. And all I could think was, wow, what an awesome dad. So good on you, Pete. Family came first, probably second and third as well. And Sean, I hope it was a bloody good movie. So Susie and the boys, my condolences, and good on you, Pete. Rest in peace.
Thanks, Chris. Recurring theme, the family. So Peter also took his talents overseas. He ran a sailing academy in Qatar. He masterminded the Provetsa TP52 for Turkish business magnate Ergin Imri, where he clearly had a lot of fun, and that is something that the family enjoyed too and is going to continue again. And he was hugely influential in the introduction of Grand Prix racing in Korea, setting up a sailing clinic and working as both a consultant and a commentator for the Korea Match Cup.
So at Mark 1, Peter Gilmore has come from behind. It was Mirsky off the line. We had a couple of, they're being interfered. There's a bit of been a collision there between Gilmore and one of the boats coming upwind. That's a bit unfortunate.
Before the very first Korea Match Cup, Peter shared with me 3 key points for successful event: a fast racing boat, good prize money, and world-class television coverage. On that foundation, the Korea Match Cup was born. Peter and I traveled from small fishing village to sailing clubs across the Korea, hosting sailing clinics, sometimes starting the day with a sashimi for breakfast. Those moments are now personal memories between Peter and me. But for young Korean sailors, they became the spark to the dream of the competing on the world stage. Peter Lester, I and all sailors in Korea will never forget your guidance, your mentorship, and your kindness.
And Young's here today, which is very cool. We'll talk about kimchi later. So, where did we get to? We go back to Peter as a commentator. So now he was in demand everywhere. He was a key caller at the America's Cup from 1995 onwards and created this worldwide reputation and a lot of great friendships. Here's some of the highlights of his fantastic commentary.
One of these boats picks up just a finger of air, a little puff of air. I'd say Kayard is not a happy boy. I think the Kiwis have rolled him over.
Oh, yes.
And he
parked in the water.
She's
we shouldn't laugh.
Aerial shot there looking down. 4 stay quite tight. Plenty of rudder tension on. 10 New Zealand moving off on starboard tack. Young America on port. It's a gain here to Prada. Made again. Team New Zealand going bow down for the dip. I think Team New Zealand are in big trouble with their boom at the moment, but this looks serious. Expect to see Alingi come back at Emirates, Team New Zealand. These very short meters up now working towards the starboard ley line will be crucial. And Telefonica have put Puma under the pump. The flags are flying. Red flag. The biggest comeback in 162 years of history of the Cup. Oracle Team USA win the 34th America's Cup. New Zealand first competed in the America's Cup in Fremantle in 1987. It was the first time a 12-metre had ever been made out of fiberglass. Plastic fantastic, and the technology that was in that boat was the starting point for New Zealand in the America's Cup, doing it differently, doing it the Kiwi way. When this concept for this foiling 75-footer was first floated in 2017, there were many people, many doubters said the boat will never fly. Te Ruatai has just flown into the history books, winning the 36th America's Cup. Emirates Team New Zealand have just hooked into a little bit of a right hand. I think it's more pressure that shift on this right hand side as Ineos tack over on the left. Still really close. You can see that advantage line is just in favour of the Kiwis, but Ineos are not going away. Very evenly matched.
There's not a single person here in the room today that doesn't have immense respect for you, Pete. There's no one in the yachting community worldwide that doesn't share that respect. But I talk to you not just as a friend, not just as representing the Daltons, but also representing Emirates Team New Zealand and the greater America's Cup community, where you had a real passion, a real love affair, and we enjoyed working with you. You carved out a second career as a commentator and were one of the best, along with PJ Montgomery. My memory goes back as far as 1977, watching you being carried in a black and white photo, watching you being carried up the beach when you became world champion in the OK Dinghy class, and your career just went from there. You'll be sadly missed, Pete. Sail on.
As something that I noted about Peter early on, and particularly in 2000 at Halsey Street in Auckland, where our studio was his dislike of being thrust into the makeup artist's chair, because we all needed some makeup to stop our bald heads from glowing or our cheeks from flashing in the heavy and hot studio lights. Peter just couldn't get to grips with that. But then he found out that all of the makeup artists that TVNZ employed for that had a great sense of humour. And so Peter was in his element. That cheeky grin of his, that wonderful impish smile, and his rather non-PC sense of humour were in their element. I don't think Peter could actually spell PC. He certainly wasn't interested in it. So he would say things that would make the rest of us think, oh my God, and he'd get away with it. Afterwards, of course, Peter rushed to the makeup artist's chair to get his makeup washed off. There's no doubt about it that makeup and Peter Lester had very little in common. Makeup artists around the world at event centres will miss you, Peter Lester. So will I. I learned a heck of a lot from you, and we had some great times together.
Now, continuing the cheeky theme, if you like, through a number of those events, there was a common denominator for Pete, and that was the voice in his ear, and that belonged to the director and sailor, Leon Sefton. Come on up. There was a little bit of a battle of wits on occasion between you two over the years.
Well, it was kind of us three because, as Martin said before, there was self-anointed work husband, which was very woke, I think, in those days, and we applaud you for it, Papa. But yeah, we got to spend a lot of time with Pete back in the 2007 Cup over in Valencia, and you know, I actually shared an apartment with Pete and figured out all he could do was boil water, so I fed him for 3 months and he swapped war stories. But his mischief was really infectious, and his laugh was even more infectious, so we used to try and draw it out of him. A colleague of mine, Andrew Hawthorne's here and today, and he and I were producing and directing that America's Cup for the television, and we decided it was open season on Peter Lester because Pete was having lots of pops at us because Harold couldn't get the racing away because there was no wind, despite all the bribes we sent out in the form of cakes for him and cigarettes for Luigi on the other course. And so there's a lot of waiting around, a lot of taking pops from Pete. So to paint a bit of a picture in the background for the television and the broadcast, the commentators are lock-in-a-box quayside. Martin's there with Peter, Martin the broadcasting professional, Pete the sailing pro. And they're surrounded by monitors and they've got headsets on and a comms panel in front of them. We have the ability to speak to them, they to us. And the kind of rule of the game really is pick your moment when to speak to your commentator, generally not when they're in mid-flow because you'll put them off their stride. But, you know, Pete was in a rather difficult position where he had no control about what we were going to do. So he was a card-carrying member of the aftercard, very happy to criticise our team who were having a bad day. You know, Pete was, you know, it's mentioned to many people, he would never go forward to the mast and he would never get involved in the colour sails, but he was very happy to criticise them. So Andrew and I would wait until Pete was in full flight, really wound up, and it's a real joy to watch commentators when they're doing their thing, because if they're really into the moment, they'll stand up, they'll lean in, and they're giving it everything they've got. And so we would just finger hovering over the comms button, wait till Peter was really in his element. Some long, poor bow team, stuffed up the kite drop. It's over the bow, it's in the water, the boat's completely stopped. Peter's giving it to them, and we would just lean in and whisper, and that, folks, is a Leicester drop. And
then he would corpse.
And he would, as Martin says, corpse, meaning he would stop him in his tracks and start laughing. Now, when Peter started laughing, it'd take a while. And if you go back and listen to some of those races over that summer, you'll find moments at bottom marks generally where Peter's just disappeared from the commentary. He tries to get up and go again, he can't, and it leaves it over to Martin to pick up the pieces. Having a pop, we called it.
Having a pop, we had a pop at everybody. I mean, you labelled me very early in the piece working with Pete, and then decided that we were Muppets. That was,
Yeah, well, a colleague of ours. We all know the beloved Muppet characters, Statler and Waldorf, and we had a pair. They earned the right, they were old, they're cantankerous, they were critical, and so taking pops from the balcony. So if the shoe fits, yeah, Martin. There's a few more photos there.
Now this picture here, the little picture in the middle, that was taken by one of the editors, and Jimmy McIntyre. He worked with us all around the world and in all sorts of edit booths, and yeah, that's all right. So we arrived in Abu Dhabi to find this sign pinned up against the wall, and Jimmy sent it to me this week, and he said, I absolutely loved working with Pete. Everyone did. Always such a lovely bloke with a wicked sense of humour and a hilariously foul mouth. I'll miss having to edit the swear words out from his bad voiceover takes. We did have a lot of laughs together, and he just had an amazing way of sort of developing some senses of humour. It could be that dockyard walk that you found on Facebook the other day.
Yeah, well, we had the joy of working with Peter at America's Cup, Volvo Ocean Races, Olympic Games, World Match Racing Championships, World Sailing Championships, and then Bermuda, Martin and Peter were working with Team New Zealand on the dock there, and we found a clip the other day with Clint Jones, one of our TV chase boat drivers, which demonstrated just how cheeky he was.
Hey, look, the really big question I've got to ask you guys is on the tacking, jibing and mark rounding, how's the camera boat going?
It's exquisite. It's the most perfect thing we've ever done.
Piss off, it's rubbish. You're always in the way. If
Not in our view.
Just get in there and stick it right into Oracle. Keep away from our blokes.
Sticking it right at Oracle, always one of Peter's things. If you want to see the full version of that, Clint's over here. There, he posted it a while ago. I'd forgotten that we did that, and it was actually a piss take of Clint. But you'll have to watch it yourselves on Facebook to see that. So that was Bermuda, and it was Pete's favourite cup and mine. We had an absolute ball, and it was really cool at the end because Susie joined us at the end as well, and we had it was just and a lot of people here who were there. Fantastic time. And it was, work-wise, it was so much fun, and it was a big change for us because we were moving from a regular TV audience to broadcasting worldwide on the internet. And here we're now going to have double Olympic champion, also turned commentator, Shirley Robertson, with her take on Pete.
Professionally, Pete seamlessly made the switch from high-level competitor into a really respected broadcast journalist. And of course, he brought an immense amount of knowledge and passion. But more than that, he really kept with him the empathy for the sailors. And you could hear it in his voice that he understood what it was like, what it felt like to line up for a start line. And that never left him. And I think because of that, he not only had the trust of the audience, but also the sailing community. When I think of Pete, I think of two of perhaps his most special jobs. The first one in Bermuda, working with Martin behind the fence of Emirates Team New Zealand. The full fortress mentality was really in play there. No other journalist could talk to them. And we all know how that story unfolded. They were trusted to tell that incredible story to the Kiwi public. And what a place to be. If you're a journalist, it is absolutely golden. Trusted by the team you love, sharing the story with the nation you love, and doing that with your mate who you completely adored. What a golden time. Also, I have to mention last year in Barcelona, Pete was reporting from Chase Boat 1. You could not get closer to the action. And every time I could hear him in my headphones, you could hear the excitement and just how much he was enjoying it. What a great time he had. We'll all miss Pete. He was full of great advice. He was a great friend. But more than anything, I will miss hearing him in my headset, hearing that passion and that enthusiasm for the sport he loved. We were all lucky to have him.
So Pete's introduction to commentating in 1992, as we've said, was aided and abetted by the introduction of graphics like Virtual Spectator, which could, enhance Pete's skill in making the sport understandable for non-sailors. The mastermind behind the visual wizardry out of Dunedin was Ian Taylor, who's flown up to be with us now.
I cannot claim to be the mastermind of anything, and just listening to these stories, I'm reminded that those graphics that we were talking about could never have come from anywhere else. They could only have come from New Zealand. And in this room today, and I'll just get to Pete in a minute, I'll never forget when we had this crazy idea and everyone said it couldn't be done. I still remember a guy called Dave Schnackenberg handing us a little CD-ROM and said, here's some software that might get you started. And Dave, it did. And the broadcasters in this room who accepted and took on this new kind of way of telling the sport. But it would never have been what it was without the two Petes and Martin Tasker who actually took those graphics and made them make sense. We've made graphics all over the world for different sports. Nothing has worked like the sailing graphics, and it's because of people like Peter who knew what to do with them, knew how to make them work, and truly brought them alive, and you two as well. So thank you for that. I was just thinking before, if Peter had seen this list of people speaking and the instruction that we had to be finished in an hour, he'd have pissed himself. That's never going to work. But one of the things I do want to close with is it's just typical Pete. At the last America's Cup, Barcelona, we had to, very last minute, develop a whole lot of new stuff and new hardware and equipment. And there was this cable that was meant to be in a New Zealand post box on its way, package on its way to America, and it got lost in a warehouse. So this was the day, if it hadn't made it, there would have been no graphics. We had no idea what we were going to do. And then somebody mentioned New Zealand Post had gone down, it was a weekend, they'd gone down and started searching for this cable, and I still didn't know how we were going to get it there. And someone said, I think Pete's flying up soon. So I rang Pete, and Pete said, yeah, I'm just actually back for a birthday party. I said, well, they'll have it out and they're going to get it. What's your address? So he gave me the address, and I said, well, they're going to deliver it to you at 6:39. I'm just looking at the text he sent me. Pete was at a birthday party. He went from there, took this photo and sent it back at 6:39 and says, got it, mate. What Pete never told me about that birthday party was his. It was his 70th birthday party, and that is just so typical of Pete. Pete, there will always be a place on our waka for you, mate.
Thanks, Ian. One of the more bizarre cups that Pete and I did together, when PJ was there as well, was that freezing week in Valencia in February 2010, when Alingi's cat lost to Oracle's giant trimaran, for which Glenn Ashby was a key player. He then joined Team New Zealand, and a great friendship was forged.
It's an unbelievably strange time, knowing that Peter won't be with us in the commentary booth or talking about sailing in the future. You'll certainly be looking down at the wind shifts, and you can sack off the virtual eye and the wind field, because I know exactly what Peter will be saying in the next America's Cup, that's for sure. But back in 2010, when I first joined Emirates Team New Zealand, we were sailing the AC-72 catamarans. I remember seeing two cheeky blokes walking down the dock, and I thought, you blokes are pretty high on life. At least that's what I hope you were high on anyway. But anyway, met Peter and Martin, and I thought, wow, I've actually met two of the characters of our sport in sailing and in the America's Cup. And I guess moving forwards, being able to take Peter out on the AC50 and see his facial expressions as we ripped around the harbour on the AC50 before Bermuda, following on to then the AC75s, and then for myself, hanging up my own boots and being able to join Peter in the commentary booth. I got to learn from the absolute best, having listened to the technical knowledge, the understanding and the absolute passion for our sport. And Peter would come in off the water, off the hydrogen chase boat, and I'd say, "Pete, we've got to debrief immediately." And I'd grab him and we'd walk down really seriously, straight round the corner, straight into the pub for our debrief and a couple of recovery drinks. Quite often joined half an hour or an hour later by Shirley and Stephen after they'd finish up their bits and pieces, and we'd be chatting away on the day's proceedings. But more often than not, our conversation would lead into family and growing up, and Peter's love of his family was one thing that was absolutely undeniably impressive. Obviously a massively difficult period for everybody going forwards, but for me to look at Peter and say he's the sort of bloke that I want to be when I grow up, that's the sort of guy Pete was. The cheekiness, the stories, his humour, his technical knowledge, absolutely second to none. And his family values, being Popper, the naughty Popper, that's what I want to be as well one day, hopefully. And for him to not be with us, going forwards will be extremely difficult. But I know we'll cross tacks again in the future. No doubt he'll be on starboard and I'll be on port, and I'll probably have to ease all the gear and do a big duck behind him. But I'll absolutely look forward to that next debrief with you, mate, whenever that may be. And it's not often that you get to drink a beer with some of the best in the business. But mate, it's not often I open a beer at 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to open one right now and have one for you. So here's cheers, mate. We'll miss you.
Nice work, Lenny. Come on up. I deliberately kept the beer thing in because it was very appropriate. Have a quick look.
Thanks very much, Martin. And I guess, sitting here, with some of the legends of the commentary world, is pretty daunting. And certainly last year, going over to Barcelona and previously to that, definitely with my L plates on, having, done a little bit of sailing over the years and have Pete just say to me, "Glennie, you know where the wind's coming from, you know what you're talking about, just talk to the pictures, don't worry about it if the gallery's burning down, don't worry if there's bombs going off and there's helicopters falling out of the sky, just keep talking to the pictures and you'll be just fine." And those words, really rang true. And, we were over there together, most of the Barcelona program last year. We looked after each other. Every day we came in and we did debrief together, and it was a really, really special period of my life to be able to listen and learn and, keep making like a sponge, because there's so many things in life that you can keep learning right the way through. And just seeing one of the pictures before there of Pete, one of the memories that I have, from the time that I was actually sailing, we had Pete, and a lot of the people that were involved in that Bermuda campaign are here with us in the room tonight. And Pete was on the AC50. He jumped on. We thought it'd be great to give Pete and Martin a bit of a taste of what an AC50 would be like to go for a ride on. So he sort of had a bit more engagement with how the boats sort of behaved. And I remember sailing along, and Pete was down on the leeward side of the boat as we sort of did a bit of a bear away and sort of cruising along. And I thought, oh shit, Pete's down to leeward. I better go and check on him, make sure that he's still with us. And I put my controller down and ran across onto the boat and sort of said, Pete, how you going? And he just looked at me with these eyes that were about this big, and he just grabbed my shoulders and he goes, "Fuck me, that was fucking fantastic." And that memory of Pete and just how much he enjoyed the sport was absolutely special. So, Pete, we'll miss you, and we'll be thinking of you in the future with the America's Cup. Thanks very much.
I love that. Done a bit of sailing. Ooh, crikey. So, the conduit for the Lester family in these past couple of rather difficult weeks has been their great friend, much acclaimed writer and photographer, Ivor Wilkins.
Thanks very much. We've all heard about Pete and his ability to communicate, and I really wanted to talk a little bit sort of from the everyman point of view. Pete's style was so easy and relaxed, no yelling or histrionics. His broadcasts really felt like a cozy chat with a friend. But dedicated sailing fans could also recognize and admire the deep knowledge that lay behind what he was saying. Some broadcasters adopt a similar persona of the easygoing, approachable man of the people. But sometimes it's just a professional artifice which they shed the minute they leave the studio. On the street, they become distant, short, dismissive. Pete was never like that. We have all seen him accosted in public, and he never ever failed to stop, answer questions, share a laugh, offer an opinion or an explanation, or listen with great patience to their stories. Just reading some of the messages that came from his local gym, people totally separate from the sailing community, many of whom had no idea who he was, underscores this aspect of his personality. They talk of his cheeky and bright personality. Another says his positive attitude, humble spirit and friendly support. Another one says he had a way of making everyone who spoke to him feel special. Another, he was so sweet with our son, who he met while watching his grandchildren play football. Another, I had no idea how famous he was. And yet another, so genuine, so humble, real and happy. Indeed, he had absolutely no time for airs or graces, which he put down to his upbringing in Littleton, where his father worked on the docks and where he first learned to sail. Talking of Littleton, I had occasion to be down there last year and stopped to take a photograph on the waterfront. As I was packing up my gear, a woman emerged from very deep bush by the roadside. "Good day, mate," she greeted me. "Do you fancy a fondle?" Except she didn't use the word fondle. She appeared neither surprised nor disappointed when I declined her invitation. But as she strolled away, I immediately texted Pete to tell him of this encounter and how impressed I was at the friendliness of his hometown natives. Quick as a flash, he sent a reply, probably one of my relatives. He was always quick with a laugh, and he spoke with affection of his formative teenage years in Littleton, sneaking into a popular waterfront bar to listen to the tales of wharfies and seamen for whom he retained all his life a great regard. Two examples of his ability to instantly engage with total strangers stand out. One was during the San Francisco America's Cup, and he and Susie had heard of a bar that served outstanding cocktails, so off we went. When we arrived, it was heaving, but we ordered our cocktails, and with nowhere to sit, we stood in a little huddle, sipping our drinks, until a rowdy group sitting at a corner table spotted Pete and yelled at him to come over, inevitably a bunch of Kiwis at large. In a second, they were all scooting over to make space, and Pete was chatting away about the events of the day and how the Kiwi sailors were going, while Susie was quizzing them about where they were from and did they know so-and-so and how were their kids getting on at school. Both of them totally engaged, genuinely interested, all the time in the world. The other occasion was after the prize giving at the recent event, the recent Cup in Barcelona. Pete would have been warmly welcomed at any of the glitzy cocktail parties going on around the city or at the victory shindig at Team New Zealand. But instead, after a full-on day of broadcasting and fulfilling media duties, he decided to head home for a quiet night. On his way, he was once again recognized on the street by a group of Kiwis who insisted on buying him a drink. Turns out they were all ITM dealers in Barcelona on a sales conference. And so Pete passed that very special night away, happily partying with a bunch of builders and tradies. He just had a magical knack of turning new friends into old friends in no time at all. Rudyard Kipling, in his famous poem, If, speaks approvingly of those who can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, nor lose the common touch. That was Pete all over. He was that rare person who spoke with multitudes, but never ever let fame or success go to his head, and instead walked with kings and commoners and always treated both exactly the same. We're about to wrap up the formal part of this function, and I'm going to pass you over to Sean Lester, the youngest of Pete and Susie's three boys. Sean's been a pillar of strength to the family through this incredibly difficult period. Before I do, however, I'd just like to acknowledge and thank the Commodore, David Blakey, and Cooper Hopman from the Squadron for the Squadron support in staging this event, and also to Martin Tasker and Leon Sefton and PJ Montgomery, who've put together this presentation, and to the speakers both here and around the world who have helped tell Pete's story. Thank you all. Sean Lester, ladies and gentlemen.
So about 5 years ago, just before our wedding, I sat down with Mum and Dad and had a very serious talk to Dad about appropriate wedding attire. And there was to be collared shirts and shoes, and he kind of just smiled and, you know. So fast forward a couple of weeks, and we were staying at the venue, and so I woke up early to make sure that everything was going to be okay. And oh, you've already seen the punchline here. I went to check in on Mum and Dad, and Mum's got her beautiful dress all laid out and ready to go, and Dad's sitting there with this naughty toddler look on his face, and he's laid out his brand new pair of jandals and shorts. And I had other things to worry about, and I said, look, Mum's going to have a fit. Mum's already bouncing off the walls. More importantly, Olivia, my wife-to-be, is going to have a fit. So we actually ended up, we called the girls and just asked them to check with Olivia, and she's a good West Coast Taranaki girl, so she thought it was hilarious, and we moved on. And come to the speech, Dad's speech, he then got up and he did one of the most beautiful, heartfelt speeches about how much he loved me and boys, and how proud he was of us for how far we'd come, and how happy he was that we'd met our beautiful wives and started our own families. And look, I was trying to think about what to say today, and I think that was my dad. He was very good at cutting through the anxiety and the worries that people have in day-to-day life, and recognizing that a lot of it actually just doesn't matter, and you can just laugh at it, and just treat it like a naughty toddler and you just move on. But then for the things that really mattered, with his work, with his sailing, he would approach it with absolute grit and determination and just effectiveness. And then when it was dealing with the family, the things that really mattered, he approached with the utmost love and care and respect. And he was such a good dad. He was such a good grandfather for the 4 nephews as well, Papa Pete. And I think if everybody in this room is going to think about how they honour his legacy, once the dust's settled in a couple of months or a couple of years, you need to try to bring that attitude into your own lives and try to laugh off and sort of take the piss of the things that don't matter and really look after the things that do. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sean. Just to lighten it up a little bit, thinking back on what Ivor was saying about the ITM builders. The postscript to my postscript for the ITM builder story was that I rang him up the next morning to find out what had gone on, because I know that he would just normally go off to a quiet thing often over these dudes. Anyway, we'd arranged. I rang him up and see how he got on, and he told me all about the RTM. And he said it got a bit untidy when the Limoncello came out, and he thought it was time to go. And I said, "Oh, that's great. I'm glad you had a good time." And I said, "Are you coming to the party tonight?" This was the big America's Cup rap party, and he said, "Oh, I haven't got an invitation." I said, well, it was sent out on a sort of one of those Q code things. Oh, he said, it'll be on your phone. He said, I can't find my phone. I loved him. Closing. Check my notes just to make sure I can remember his name. Thanks, Sean, for sharing Peter with us. To close, we've got Pete. Pete, well, you're going to tell the story about the song, but Tony Ray, Trey.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, that's some pretty great stories there for a great man, as we know. It's kind of ironic. They asked me to sing a song, and I obviously more than happy to, but only if they chose it. This is a song that the family chose, and ironically, I remember walking through the village, or actually riding through the village in Barcelona after a sailing day, and on the scooters, and seeing Pete and I think Steve McIver sneaking into a little bar or a little spot having a quiet one, and they had entertainment on the stage every day at the village, and Pete yells out, "Hey Trey, you should get up there and do a couple of Jimmy Buffett songs." I said, "Yeah, okay, Pete, you get up and piss off, mate. I'm not getting up." And then we carried on. So it's kind of ironic that they've chosen this song. So I hope I do it justice, and it's a privilege to do it for Pete. But I'm sure you'll know it, so sing along if you feel free.
Nibble on sponge cake, watching the sun bake. All of them tourists covered in oil, strumming my 6 string on my front porch swing. Smell those shrimps, they're beginning to boil. Come on. Wasting away again in Margaritaville, searching for my last shaker of salt. Some people claim that there's a woman to blame, but I know it's our own damn fault. Don't know the reason, I stayed here all season. Nothing but sure but this brand new tattoo. But it's a real beauty, that Mexican cutie. How we got here, I haven't a clue. Come on. Wasting away again in Margaritaville, searching for my last shaker of salt. Salt, salt, salt. Some people claim that there's a woman to blame, but I know it's our own damn fault. I blew out my flip-flop, stepped on a pop-top. I cut my heel, had to cruise on back home. There's booze in the blender, and soon it will render. That frozen concoction that helps me hang on. I'm wasting away again in Margaritaville, searching for my last shaker of salt. Some people claim that there's a woman to blame, but I know it's our own damn fault. Yes, and some people claim that there's a woman to blame, but I know it's our own damn fault.
Thank you. Sail on, Pete. We'll never forget you.
That wraps it up, really. Thank you very much. Thanks again for sharing your dad with us. And I forget my instructions here, right? Dinghy Locker Bar is open, Members Bar, kitchen are open, and no doubt you're going to stay on and lubricate some more reminiscing. Thanks for coming along and sending off our great mate. Thank you.